The radio crackled with desperate voices. 389 Navy SEALs pinned down in a kill zone, surrounded by enemy fire, with no way out. Command said extraction was impossible. The terrain was too open, the enemy too entrenched. They needed a miracle. What they got was Irene Hill, a 26-year-old A-10 Warthog pilot who'd spent 2 years being told she was too soft, too emotional, too European to handle combat. For 24 months, she'd been flying endless patrol missions while watching others get the real assignments. But Irene had been preparing for this moment in secret, studying tactics no one taught her, running simulations no one asked for. And when those SEALs needed someone willing to fly into hell itself, she didn't wait for permission. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The sun blazed across Kandahar airfield at 0530 hours, turning the flight line into a shimmering strip of heat and jet fuel. Captain Irene Hill stood beside her A-10 Thunderbolt II, running through her pre-flight checklist for what felt like the 1000th time. The Warthog, as everyone called it, was an ugly beast of an aircraft, designed around a massive 30mm cannon that could shred tanks like tissue paper. But for the past 2 years, Irene had used that cannon for nothing more than practice runs against abandoned vehicles in the desert. She was 26 years old, born in a small town outside Prague, and had immigrated to the United States at 19 with dreams of becoming a fighter pilot. Her accent still carried the soft musicality of her Czech heritage, something her squadron mates never let her forget. They called her Euro behind her back, sometimes with affection, often with dismissal. The kind of dismissal that came when someone didn't fit the mold of what a combat pilot was supposed to be. Irene had graduated top of her class in flight school. Her instrument scores were perfect. Her tactical knowledge exceeded most of her instructors. But there was something about her that made commanders hesitate. Maybe it was the way she teared up during emotional moments in briefings. Maybe it was her tendency to ask, "But what about the civilians?" during mission planning. Maybe it was simply that she was a woman in a world that still wasn't entirely sure women belonged in the cockpit of a close air support gunship. Whatever the reason, the result was always the same. Training missions. Patrol routes. Show-of-force flyovers that never resulted in actual engagement. While her fellow pilots accumulated combat hours and mission patches, Irene circled the same stretches of desert, her weapons systems armed but never fired in anger. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, her squadron commander, was conducting the morning briefing when Irene slipped into the ready room. She took her usual seat near the back, her flight suit crisp despite the heat, her notebook open to a fresh page. Around her, pilots traded jokes and compared notes from the previous day's missions. No one acknowledged her arrival. "All right, settle down," Brennan called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. He was a career officer, 20 years in the cockpit, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same desert rock that surrounded the base. "We've got a busy day ahead. Operation Viper Strike is moving into Phase 3. Irene's pen hovered over her notepad. Operation Viper Strike was the biggest offensive the coalition had mounted in months. Multiple SEAL teams were pushing into hostile territory, clearing insurgent strongholds and establishing forward positions. The kind of operation that required constant air support, the kind where close air support pilots earned their reputation. Brennan began reading assignments. "Patterson, you're on station over Sector Delta. Jenkins, you're covering the northern approach to the valley. Torres, you're backup for the extraction teams." Each name brought nods and confirmations. Pilots checking their watches, mentally preparing for missions that mattered. "Hill." Brennan's voice pulled her attention back. "You're on CAP duty over Sector November. Standard patrol pattern, 4-hour rotation. CAP. Combat Air Patrol." The military's way of saying fly in circles and look intimidating. Sector November wasn't even close to the operational area. It was rear security, the kind of assignment given to pilots who needed flight hours but couldn't be trusted with real missions. Irene's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." Around her, she caught the exchange of glances. Torres, a pilot who'd joined the squadron 6 months after her but already had 3 combat deployments, leaned over to Jenkins. "Makes sense," he muttered, just loud enough for Irene to hear. "Can't have Euro getting emotional when things get hot." Jenkins smirked. "Remember that simulation last month? She aborted the gun run because the target was near a residential area." Textbook overthinking. "It was a school," Irene said quietly, not looking up from her notebook. The intelligence was unclear about whether it was occupied. "It was a simulation," Torres replied. "The whole point is to complete the mission. You can't second-guess yourself in combat. And you can't kill civilians because you're too eager to pull the trigger," Irene shot back, her accent thickening slightly as her emotion rose. The ready room went quiet. Brennan's expression hardened. "Hill, Torres, save it. This isn't a debate club. You've got your assignments." Dismissed. As the briefing broke up, Irene gathered her materials and headed for the door. She felt the familiar weight of isolation settling on her shoulders. It wasn't that her squadron mates were cruel. Most of them were decent people. But they'd categorized her, placed her in a box labeled "not quite right for this," and once someone was in that box, it was nearly impossible to climb out. In the female locker room, she changed into her flight gear in silence. The G-suit felt like a second skin after 2 years of wearing it. Her helmet sat on the bench beside her, its visor reflecting her face back at her. She looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. The exhaustion of constantly proving yourself and never being given the chance. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger sister back in Prague. "How's my big shot pilot?" it read, followed by a string of airplane emojis. Irene smiled despite herself. Her family believed in her even if no one else seemed to. She typed back quickly, "Another day of protecting the world from their very comfortable altitude. Miss you." By 0700 hours, Irene was strapped into her A-10, running through her startup sequence. The Warthog's twin turbofan engines roared to life with their characteristic whine. Ground crew gave her the all-clear, and she taxied toward the runway. The sun was higher now, turning the desert into an oven. Inside the cockpit, temperature readouts climbed steadily. "Tower, this is Hawkeye 2-6 requesting clearance for departure," Irene said into her radio, her voice professional and clear. "Hawkeye 2-6, you're cleared for takeoff. Proceed to Sector November and maintain patrol altitude." The A-10 accelerated down the runway, its ungainly appearance belying the raw power beneath its wings. At 180 knots, Irene pulled back on the stick and felt the familiar sensation of leaving the Earth behind. Whatever her limitations on the ground, up here she was in her element. As she climbed to patrol altitude and banked toward her assigned sector, Irene allowed herself a moment of bitter satisfaction. They might not trust her with the important missions, but they still needed someone to fly the boring ones. And boring was exactly what today was going to be. Another 4 hours of circling empty desert, another day of watching other pilots earn their glory. She had no idea that in exactly 43 minutes, everything would change. Sector November was exactly as tedious as Irene had expected. She flew a lazy figure-8 pattern at 15,000 feet, her radar showing nothing but empty desert below. The radio chatter from other squadrons told a different story. Patterson was engaging enemy positions in Sector Delta. Jenkins had just provided cover for a SEAL team extraction. Even Torres, who'd made his snide comment less than 2 hours ago, was calling in successful gun runs. Irene tried not to feel bitter. She understood the logic, even if she didn't agree with it. Combat required split-second decisions, absolute confidence, no hesitation. And she'd hesitated. That simulation Torres mentioned hadn't been her finest moment. She'd seen the target, locked her weapons, and then noticed the building adjacent to it, a structure that intelligence had marked as possibly civilian. She'd broken off the attack to request clarification. By the time command confirmed the target, the simulation had ended. Mission failure due to pilot indecision. Never mind that she'd been right. The building had been a school. Never mind that her caution would have saved lives. In the world of close air support, hesitation equaled weakness. And weakness got people killed. The sun climbed higher. Irene sipped water from the tube in her flight suit and adjusted her seat straps. Her eyes scanned the instruments out of habit. Fuel levels good. Weapons systems armed but safe. Radar clear. Another hour and 15 minutes until her rotation ended. Then her radio exploded with noise. All units, this is Mongoose Actual. We have troops in contact. Multiple teams pinned down in Sector Charlie. Heavy fire from all sides. We need immediate close air support. Irene's hand instinctively moved toward her stick before she caught herself. Sector Charlie wasn't her assignment. She was supposed to maintain patrol in Sector November. But she couldn't help listening as the situation developed. Mongoose Actual, this is Hawkeye Lead. We're 20 minutes out. Can you hold? Negative, Hawkeye Lead. We've got 389 personnel pinned in a valley. They're in a kill box with no cover. RPGs and heavy machine guns on 3 sides. We need support now. Irene's blood ran cold. 389 personnel. That wasn't a single team. That was multiple SEAL platoons, probably support elements too. And they were trapped. Mongoose, this is Overwatch Command. Be advised all available air support is engaged. Hawkeye Lead is your closest asset at 20 minutes. Command, we don't have 20 minutes. They're getting shredded down here. Irene checked her navigation display. Sector Charlie was 12 minutes away at maximum speed. She was closer than Hawkeye Lead. But she wasn't authorized to leave her patrol area. Leaving her assigned sector without orders was a court-martial offense. The radio continued its desperate chorus. Mongoose Actual, casualties mounting. We need an exit route. The valley entrance is blocked by enemy positions. Command, request artillery support. Negative, Mongoose. Artillery is out of range. You need air. Irene's mind raced. She'd studied the terrain maps obsessively during her downtime. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she believed a pilot should know every inch of the battle space. She could picture Sector Charlie in her mind, a narrow valley with steep walls, a single entrance that could easily be defended. If the SEALs were trapped inside, they'd need someone to clear that entrance. And clearing it would require precision fire in a confined space. Exactly the kind of mission no one trusted her to fly. Hawkeye Lead, this is Overwatch. What's your ETA? 18 minutes now, Command. We're pushing it as fast as we can. 18 minutes. Irene looked at her fuel gauge. She had plenty. Her weapons were armed. She knew the terrain. And she was 12 minutes away. But she also knew what would happen if she left her sector without authorization. Brennan would have her grounded immediately. Her career would effectively be over. All the work, all the sacrifice, all the proving herself would count for nothing. On the radio, a new voice came through, younger, strained with pain and fear. This is Mongoose 2-3. We've got wounded who can't move. If we don't get air support in the next 10 minutes, we're looking at catastrophic casualties. Catastrophic casualties. Militaries speak for a lot of people are going to die. Irene's hand tightened on her stick. She thought about Torres's comment. Can't have Euro getting emotional when things get hot. She thought about every simulation, every evaluation, every moment when someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't quite right for the job. Then she thought about 389 people dying in a valley while she flew circles over empty desert because she was too afraid to break the rules. Her decision crystallized in an instant. She banked hard left, pushing her throttles to maximum. The A-10 responded immediately, its powerful engines accelerating her towards Sector Charlie. Her hands moved across the weapons panel, bringing her systems fully online. The 30mm cannon spooled up. Her Maverick missiles armed. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd prepared for, was about to be tested. Overwatch Command, this is Hawkeye 2-6, she said into her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I'm 12 minutes from Sector Charlie. I can provide immediate close air support. There was a pause. Then, Hawkeye 2-6, you are not authorized to leave your patrol sector. Return to station immediately. Command, with respect, I am the closest air asset to troops in contact. I can save lives. 2-6, this is a direct order. Return to Sector November immediately. Irene switched her radio to the ground frequency. Mongoose Actual, this is Hawkeye 2-6. I'm inbound with full weapons. Give me targets. The response was immediate, filled with desperate hope. 2-6, you're an angel. We need the valley entrance cleared. Enemy positions on both sides of the opening, approximately 200 meters apart. Copy that, Mongoose. ETA 11 minutes. Start marking friendlies with IR strobes. I'll need clear identification to avoid blue on blue. Roger 2-6. Strobes going active now. Irene's tactical display updated as the SEAL teams activated their infrared markers. Even from this distance, her sensors could pick up the cluster of friendly signals in the valley. And surrounding them, based on the ground team's reports, were enemy positions that needed to be eliminated. She'd just committed herself. There was no going back now. She'd either save those SEALs or fail spectacularly trying. Either way, her career as she'd known it was over. But as she pushed her A-10 toward the fight, Irene felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years: purpose. This was why she'd become a pilot. Not to fly circles over empty desert, not to prove she could follow orders, but to save lives when it mattered most. The mountains of Sector Charlie appeared on her horizon. Somewhere in those valleys, 389 men were counting on her. Time to show everyone what too emotional really meant. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The terrain of Sector Charlie materialized before Irene like a nightmare made real. The valley was narrower than the satellite images had suggested, its walls steep and unforgiving. She could see why the SEALs were trapped. The single entrance was a choke point barely 300 meters wide, flanked by rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover for enemy positions. Her radar warning receiver screamed to life. Someone was painting her with targeting radar. 2-6, be advised you have multiple manpads in the area. Mongoose Actual's voice crackled through her headset. We've counted at least 4 shoulder-fired missiles. Man-portable air defense systems. Exactly what every close air support pilot feared most. The A-10 was tough, designed to take punishment and keep flying, but a well-placed missile could still bring her down. Irene's training took over. She descended rapidly, dropping to 8,000 feet while deploying chaff and flares. The metallic strips and burning magnesium created a cloud of false targets behind her aircraft. The radar lock broke momentarily, but she knew it would return. Mongoose, I need exact coordinates on those enemy positions. I'm coming in hot. Sending now, 2-6. Be advised, they're dug in deep. Standard gun runs might not be effective. Irene studied the coordinates as they populated on her display. The enemy had chosen their positions brilliantly. They were nestled into the rocky terrain, protected from above by natural overhangs. A conventional strafing run would be mostly ineffective. She'd need to get lower, angle her approach differently, take risks that no manual recommended. Her radio crackled with a new voice. Hawkeye 2-6, this is Colonel Brennan. You are ordered to break off immediately and return to base. Do you copy? Irene's finger hovered over the transmit button. She could still turn back. Accept the consequences of her unauthorized departure but avoid the even worse consequences of engaging without clearance. Below her, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the valley entrance. The SEALs were fighting for their lives. Negative, Colonel. I'm engaging. She switched back to ground frequency before Brennan could respond. "Mongoose, I'm beginning my run. Keep your heads down." Irene rolled her A-10 into a steep dive, the desert floor rushing up to meet her. At 4,000 feet, she leveled out and armed her cannon. The targeting pipper on her heads-up display centered on the first enemy position. Her finger rested on the trigger. The radar warning screamed again. Missile launch. Irene broke hard right, pulling 6 GS and dumping more flares. The missile tracking system on her display showed a heat seeker arcing toward her tail. She rolled inverted and pulled through the dive, feeling the crushing pressure against her chest and legs. The G-suit inflated, forcing blood back toward her brain. The missile exploded 200 meters behind her, close enough that her aircraft shuddered from the blast wave but far enough to avoid damage. She rolled upright and reacquired her target. 2-6, that was too close. Mongoose called out. "I'm fine." Starting gun run. Irene dropped to 2,000 feet, dangerously low for this terrain. The rocky outcroppings flashed past her canopy. She could see enemy fighters now, tiny figures scrambling among the rocks. Her targeting system locked. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life with its distinctive BRRRT sound. 30mm rounds streamed from the nose of her aircraft at 3,900 rounds per minute. Each depleted uranium shell could penetrate tank armor. Against human targets and light fortifications, the effect was devastating. The first enemy position disintegrated. Rock, dirt, and debris exploded outward as the cannon shells chewed through the defensive position. Irene walked her fire across the entrance, methodically eliminating the threats on the left side of the valley. Her aircraft shook as she pulled up and banked for another run. "Mongoose, left side is clear. Coming around for the right. Good hits, 2-6. We can see the entrance. Keep it up." But as Irene lined up her second pass, she saw something that made her blood freeze. There were vehicles moving up behind the enemy positions. Technical trucks mounting heavy machine guns, and something worse. An armored personnel carrier with what looked like a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. That gun could shred her A-10 if the crew got it positioned correctly. She had maybe 30 seconds before it became operational. Irene made a split-second decision. She armed one of her Maverick missiles and designated the APC as her target. The missile locked. She fired. The Maverick dropped from her wing and accelerated toward the target, its infrared seeker guiding it unerringly toward the heat signature of the APC's engine. The explosion was massive, the shaped-charge warhead designed for tanks making short work of the lighter vehicle. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition aboard the APC cooked off. The Zu-23 would never fire a shot. The second gun run was even more dangerous than the first. Enemy fighters, realizing they were under sustained air attack, had begun dispersing into the rocks. They were no longer clustered in defensive positions but scattered across the terrain, making them harder to target without risking collateral damage to the trapped SEALs. Irene's European sensibilities, the ones her squadron mates had mocked, suddenly became her greatest asset. She couldn't just saturate the area with fire. She had to be precise, surgical, discriminating between threats and friendlies in split-second decisions. She came in low again, this time from a different angle. The infrared strobes from the SEAL positions glowed bright green in her targeting pod display. She could see them huddled in a depression at the center of the valley, caught between the remaining enemy positions. "Mongoose, I need you to pull back 50 meters from the entrance. I'm going to put rounds danger close. 2-6, we've got wounded who can't move fast. Then move them fast. You've got 30 seconds. Irene watched her display as the friendly signatures shifted, the SEALs dragging their wounded comrades away from the kill zone. She counted down in her head. 20 seconds. 15. 10. At 5 seconds, she opened fire. This time, she wasn't just suppressing. She was eliminating. Her cannon rounds marched across the right side of the valley entrance with mechanical precision. Each burst was calculated, aimed at specific clusters of enemy fighters. The A-10's cannon was accurate enough to hit a target the size of a car from a mile away. At 2,000 feet, Irene was practically point blank. The enemy positions evaporated under the onslaught. But return fire was intensifying. She could hear rounds pinging off her armored cockpit tub. The A-10 was designed to take punishment, its critical systems protected by titanium plates that could stop 23mm shells. But there was a limit to how much damage any aircraft could absorb. Her warning systems lit up again. Another missile launch, this time from directly ahead. Irene's options were limited. She was too low to climb effectively, and turning would expose her to ground fire from multiple directions. Instead, she did something that seemed counterintuitive. She dove even lower and accelerated directly toward the missile. The missile's proximity fuse was designed to detonate when it got close to a target. By racing toward it, Irene was forcing it to detonate early, before it could maneuver into a lethal position. The explosion rocked her aircraft, and multiple warning lights illuminated on her panel. She'd taken damage, but she was still flying. 2-6, you're trailing smoke. Mongoose called out. I'm aware. How's that entrance looking? Clear. We can see daylight. You did it. But Irene wasn't done. Her tactical display showed more enemy vehicles approaching from the north. If the SEALs tried to evacuate now, they'd run straight into reinforcements. She needed to buy them more time. Mongoose, I'm detecting enemy reinforcements heading your way. I'm going to interdict. 2-6, you're damaged. You need to break off. Not until you're clear. Irene banked hard toward the approaching convoy. She'd expended one Maverick missile and a significant portion of her cannon ammunition, but she still had options. She armed her remaining missiles in designated targets. The convoy was moving fast, probably alerted to the situation by radio. 3 technical trucks and another APC, this one older but still dangerous. She fired 2 Mavericks in quick succession, watching them streak toward their targets. Both missiles found their marks. The lead and trailing vehicles exploded, blocking the road and trapping the convoy. The remaining vehicles stopped, their crews bailing out to take cover. Irene's fuel warning light illuminated. She'd been burning through fuel at an unsustainable rate with all the hard maneuvering and low-altitude flying. She had maybe 20 minutes before she'd need to land, and that was cutting it dangerously close. Mongoose, you need to move now. I can't maintain coverage much longer. Copy 2-6. We're evacuating through the entrance. All personnel moving. Irene circled the valley, her eyes scanning for any remaining threats. More warning lights appeared on her panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Right engine temperature climbing. Her A-10 had taken more damage than she'd initially thought. She watched her display as the friendly signatures began moving out of the valley, a stream of green dots heading toward safety. It was working. They were going to make it. Then her master caution light illuminated, accompanied by a tone in her headset that every pilot dreaded. Fire warning. Right engine. The fire warning demanded immediate action. Irene's hand moved automatically through the emergency procedure, shutting down the right engine and activating the suppression system. The A-10 could fly on a single engine, but it meant reduced performance exactly when she might need it most. 2-6, your right engine is flaming out. Mongoose Actual's voice carried new urgency. You need to egress. Irene checked her fuel again. The math was brutal. With one engine in battle damage, she might not make it back to Kandahar. But the nearest alternate airfield was 40 minutes away. She'd be cutting it impossibly close. Mongoose, I'm staying until you're clear. She continued her orbit, watching the SEAL team stream out of the valley. They were moving as fast as their wounded allowed, but it wasn't fast enough. Her tactical display showed more enemy forces converging on the area. Word had spread that Americans were trapped, and every hostile fighter in the region was responding. Her left engine temperature was climbing now. The remaining engine was working overtime to compensate for the dead one, pushing beyond its normal operational limits. Irene adjusted her mixture and throttle, trying to keep the engine from overheating while maintaining enough power to stay airborne. 2-6, this is Hawkeye lead. We're 5 minutes out. We can take over coverage. Finally. Reinforcements. Copy Hawkeye lead. I'll brief you on station. Irene's voice remained calm despite the growing list of problems with her aircraft. Be advised, heavy ground fire and manpads active. Recommend high-altitude approach initially. Roger 2-6. We're seeing your aircraft status on data link. You need to RTB immediately. Return to base. Yes, she did. But those 5 minutes felt like an eternity when men on the ground were exposed and vulnerable. Her radar warning receiver chirped again. Not a full lock, but someone was searching for her. Probably another missile team setting up. She turned toward the threat, presenting her damaged aircraft's profile to draw their attention. If they were focused on her, they weren't shooting at the SEALs. The radio crackled with a new voice, one she recognized with a sinking feeling. Hawkeye 2-6, this is Overwatch Actual. General Vance. The theater commander. This was either very good or catastrophically bad. 2-6 copies, Irene responded. Captain Hill, I've been monitoring this situation. I want you to know that regardless of how this ends, you've shown extraordinary courage today. Regardless of how this ends. That was military speak for you might not survive this. Thank you, sir. But I'm planning on landing safely and facing whatever music is waiting. A brief pause, then Vance's voice returned with what might have been respect. I believe you will, Captain. Godspeed. Irene's fuel warning became more insistent. She was now at the point where any delay would mean not reaching any airfield. She had to leave now. Mongoose, what's your status? Last elements clearing the valley now, 2-6. We're going to make it thanks to you. Hawkeye lead, this is 2-6. I'm passing control to you. Friendlies are clear of the valley, but enemy reinforcements are still in the area. Copy 2-6. We have the picture. Get yourself home. Irene turned her battered A-10 toward Kandahar, nursing the throttle and watching her fuel gauge like it was counting down the seconds of her life. The remaining engine was running hot but stable. Her hydraulics were degraded but functional. She had no right engine, multiple holes in her airframe, and barely enough fuel to make it home. But she was alive, and so were 389 Navy SEALs. The flight back was the longest of her life. Every minute felt like an hour as she balanced fuel consumption against the need to maintain altitude. The A-10 was designed to take damage, but even she had limits. Irene could feel the aircraft responding sluggishly to her inputs, the hydraulic system struggling to move control surfaces. At 20 miles out, she radioed the tower. Kandahar Tower, this is Hawkeye 2-6 declaring an emergency. Single engine, battle damage, fuel critical. Request priority landing. 2-6, you're cleared for straight-in approach runway 23. Emergency crews are standing by. Irene could see the airfield now, a welcoming sight that represented safety and, probably, the end of her career as she knew it. She'd saved lives today, but she'd also disobeyed direct orders, engaged without authorization, and violated about a dozen regulations. As she lined up for final approach, her left engine sputtered. The fuel gauge touched zero. She was flying on fumes and momentum now, with the runway still a mile away. 2-6, you're smoking again. Tower called out. Can you make the field? Could she? Irene looked at her altitude and distance. It would be close. Impossibly close. Affirm tower. I'm committed. The A-10 glided toward the runway, its remaining engine coughing as the last drops of fuel burned away. Irene held the nose high, bleeding off speed while maintaining just enough lift to stay airborne. The runway threshold passed beneath her, and she eased the stick forward. The main landing gear touched down with a jarring impact. The aircraft bounced once, settled, and rolled. Irene deployed her speed brake and let the A-10's weight slow it naturally without functional thrust reversers. As the aircraft coasted to a stop on the runway, both engines finally quit. Emergency vehicles raced toward her position, their lights flashing. Irene sat in her cockpit for a moment, her hands still on the controls, barely believing she'd made it back. Then she began the shutdown checklist, her movements automatic despite her exhaustion. She'd made it home. Now came the hard part. The fire crews swarmed Irene's aircraft before she'd even fully opened her canopy. Foam sprayed across the right engine nacelle, where fuel had been leaking and smoldering. She climbed down from the cockpit on shaky legs, and her flight suit soaked with sweat. Colonel Brennan was waiting at the bottom of the ladder, his face unreadable. Behind him stood what looked like half the base command staff. This was going to be ugly. "Captain Hill," Brennan said formally. "You're to report to the command center immediately." "Yes, sir." Irene's voice was steady despite the adrenaline crash beginning to hit her system. As she walked toward the waiting vehicle, she passed a group of maintenance crew who were already examining her aircraft. She heard one of them whistle low. Holy hell, she took 40, maybe 50 hits. How did this bird stay in the air? Because the pilot wouldn't let it quit, another responded. The ride to the command center was silent. Brennan sat across from her, occasionally glancing at his tablet but saying nothing. Irene used the time to mentally prepare for what was coming. Court-martial, definitely. Probably a dishonorable discharge. Her career was over, but at least she'd ended it saving lives rather than watching people die while she followed protocol. The command center conference room was crowded when she arrived. General Vance sat at the head of the table, flanked by his staff officers. A legal officer was present, which confirmed Irene's suspicions about the severity of the situation. But there was also someone else, a SEAL commander she didn't recognize, wearing the trident insignia and ribbons of someone who'd spent a career in combat. "Captain Hill, please be seated," General Vance said, gesturing to a chair facing the assembled officers. Irene sat, keeping her back straight and her expression neutral. Whatever was coming, she'd face it with dignity. Vance studied her for a long moment, then spoke. "Captain, you disobeyed direct orders from both your squadron commander and from Overwatch Command. You left your assigned patrol sector without authorization. You engaged enemy forces without clearance. Do you dispute any of these facts?" "No, sir. I don't dispute them. Can you explain why you felt authorized to ignore the chain of command?" Irene met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I had troops in contact who needed immediate air support. I was the closest asset with the capability to assist. The tactical situation didn't allow time for proper authorization procedures. I made a decision that I believed would save American lives. And if you had been shot down? If your aircraft had been destroyed and you'd been killed or captured? Then I would have failed, sir. But I had to try. Those men deserve someone willing to take that risk." The SEAL commander leaned forward. "General, if I may?" Vance nodded. "Captain Hill, I'm Commander Reeves. I was with Mongoose Actual in that valley today." He paused, his weathered face serious. "My teams had maybe 5 minutes before we'd have been overrun. We had 47 wounded who couldn't move fast enough to escape. When your cannons started tearing apart those enemy positions, you gave us hope when we had none." Irene felt her throat tighten but kept her composure. Reeves continued. "I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've worked with dozens of air support pilots. What you did today, the precision, the courage, the willingness to take fire to protect us, that was the finest display of close air support I've ever witnessed." "Commander Reeves has submitted a formal commendation," Vance said. "As have the other SEAL team leaders who were in that valley. All 389 personnel you protected wanted on record that you saved their lives." Irene's mind reeled. Commendations? She'd expected condemnation. "We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. General Vance opened a folder on the table before him, pulling out several documents. Captain Hill, you put me in an impossible position. On one hand, you violated clear orders and broke protocol. On the other hand, you saved 389 American lives through exceptional skill and courage under fire. He paused, letting the weight of both statements settle in the room. I've spent the last 3 hours on calls with Central Command, with the Secretary of Defense, and with senior leadership trying to determine the appropriate response to your actions. Do you know what conclusion we reached? No, sir, Irene replied quietly. That we've been criminally underutilizing you. Vance's expression softened slightly. Captain, I've reviewed your entire service record. Top of your class in flight school. Perfect instrument scores. Exceptional tactical knowledge. And yet for 2 years, you've been relegated to patrol duty and training missions. Can you tell me why that is? Irene hesitated. This felt like a trap, but she'd already burned every bridge. Might as well be honest. Sir, I believe my commanders viewed me as too emotional for combat operations. Too hesitant. Not aggressive enough for close air support work. Because you aborted that simulation to avoid potential civilian casualties. Yes, sir. Vance nodded slowly. I watched the footage of that simulation. You were absolutely correct to abort. The intelligence was flawed, and the building was indeed occupied by civilians. Your decision showed exactly the kind of judgment we should want in our pilots. He leaned forward. Captain Hill, do you know what separates a good close air support pilot from a great one? Sir? A good pilot follows orders and hits targets. A great pilot understands that every trigger pull has consequences. That precision matters more than aggression. That the goal isn't just to destroy the enemy but to protect our people. Vance gestured toward Commander Reeves. Today, you demonstrated all of those qualities under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Colonel Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Irene noticed but kept her focus on the general. However, Vance continued, his tone hardening, we cannot simply ignore your breach of protocol. If we allow pilots to freelance whenever they disagree with orders, we undermine the entire command structure. So here's what's going to happen. Irene braced herself. You're being formally reprimanded for leaving your assigned sector without authorization. That reprimand will go in your permanent record. Vance paused. You're also being reassigned effective immediately to the 354th Fighter Squadron. They specialize in high-risk close air support operations. You'll undergo advanced tactical training, and upon completion, you'll be qualified for the most dangerous missions we fly. Irene's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. Not a court-martial. Not a discharge. A promotion in everything but name. Sir, I don't understand. Captain, today you proved that when American lives are on the line, you'll do whatever it takes to bring them home safely. That's exactly the quality we need in our most critical operations. Vance glanced at his legal officer. The reprimand satisfies the need for accountability. Your new assignment satisfies the need for proper utilization of exceptional talent. Commander Reeves spoke up again. Captain Hill, my teams are going back into hostile territory next week. We're going to need air support. I specifically requested that you be assigned to provide it. The commander was quite insistent, Vance said with the hint of a smile. Something about not trusting his men's lives to anyone who hasn't already proven they'll fly through hell to protect them. Irene felt tears threatening but forced them back. She'd spent 2 years being told she was too emotional, too soft. She wouldn't prove them right now, at this crucial moment. Sir, I'm honored. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Captain. The 354th doesn't accept everyone. You'll have to prove yourself all over again. But based on today's performance, I don't think that'll be a problem. Vance stood, and everyone in the room followed suit. Dismissed, Captain. Report to the 354th tomorrow at 0600 hours. And Captain? Yes, sir. Outstanding work today. Truly outstanding. As Irene left the conference room, her legs felt weak. She'd gone from expecting the end of her career to receiving what amounted to a battlefield promotion. The hallway outside was crowded with personnel who'd apparently been waiting for the meeting to conclude. Torres was there, looking uncomfortable. Jenkins stood nearby, his usual smirk absent. But it was Patterson who approached her first. "Hill, I owe you an apology." "We all do. What you did today was incredible." Irene nodded, accepting the olive branch. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," Torres interjected, stepping forward. "You did what none of us had the guts to do. You broke the rules to save lives. That takes a special kind of courage." He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong." As Irene shook his hand, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer Euro, the emotional pilot who couldn't be trusted with real missions. She was the pilot who'd saved 389 SEALs through skill and determination. Her radio crackled. It was still clipped to her flight suit, tuned to the ground frequency. "Any station, this is Mongoose Actual. If Captain Hill is monitoring, the last of my men just made it to the rally point. Everyone accounted for. Zero Kia. Tell her we owe her everything." The personnel in the hallway heard it too. A spontaneous round of applause broke out. Irene felt her carefully maintained composure finally crack. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and for once, she didn't care who saw it. The debriefing lasted another 3 hours. Irene sat in a small room with intelligence officers, reviewing every moment of the engagement. They wanted to know enemy positions, weapon systems observed, effectiveness of her tactics. Her gun camera footage played on repeat, showing the precision of her cannon runs. "Captain, this shot here," one intelligence officer paused the video. "You put a burst within 10 meters of friendly positions. How did you have the confidence to fire that close?" Irene studied the frozen image. "I could see the IR strobes marking the SEAL positions. I knew exactly where they were. The enemy was trying to use our people as human shields, but the angle of my approach gave me a clear shot. Most pilots wouldn't have attempted it. Too much risk of fratricide. Most pilots weren't there, sir. I was. And those men needed someone willing to take calculated risks." The intelligence officer nodded thoughtfully. "Your precision was remarkable. We're incorporating your tactics into our training protocols." After the debriefing, Irene finally made it back to her quarters. It was nearly midnight. She'd been awake for 20 hours, and her body felt like it had been through a combat deployment rather than a single mission. She peeled off her flight suit, noticing for the first time the bruises on her ribs from the G-forces and the raw spots on her hands from gripping the controls. Her phone had dozens of messages. Her sister in Prague had somehow heard about the mission and was simultaneously worried and proud. Fellow pilots from flight school had sent congratulations. Even her father, who'd been skeptical about her military career, had left a voicemail in Czech saying he'd always known she was capable of greatness. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Major Elena Volkov, a Russian-American pilot Irene had met during a NATO exercise 2 years ago. Elena had faced similar challenges, similar doubts about her capabilities. "Heard what you did today. You just changed the game for all of us. Every female pilot who gets dismissed as too emotional, too weak, too whatever, now is proof that excellence transcends prejudice. Proud of you, sister." Irene read the message 3 times. She hadn't thought about it in those terms. She'd just been trying to save lives. But Elena was right. By succeeding so spectacularly in the face of doubt, she'd opened doors for others. Sleep came hard despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept replaying the mission, analyzing decisions, wondering if she'd done everything optimally. The sound of the missile proximity warning. The feel of the stick in her hands during that final approach with no fuel. The faces of the maintenance crew examining her bullet-riddled aircraft. When her alarm went off at 0500, she felt like she'd barely slept. but there was no time to recover. She had to report to the 354th Fighter Squadron in 1 hour, and she had no idea what to expect. The 354th's ready room was different from her old squadron. The walls were covered with mission patches and photographs of aircraft in combat. These weren't training missions or routine patrols. Every image showed real ordnance, real targets, real combat. This was where the serious work happened. A dozen pilots looked up as she entered. Most were men, but there were 2 other women present, both wearing flight suits with impressive collections of mission patches. The atmosphere was professional but intense. These were people who'd seen real combat and had the scars to prove it. "You must be Hill," said a woman approaching her with an extended hand. "I'm Captain Saracen, one of your new flight leads. Welcome to the 354th. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. We're both captains. Call me Sarah." Chen gestured around the room. "This is the team. We heard what you did yesterday. Impressive flying." A tall pilot with a badly scarred left arm approached. "Captain James Wilson. I was the one you were covering for when you were stuck doing CAP in Sector November. Sorry about that, by the way. If I'd known you could fly like that, I'd have requested you as my wingman months ago." "I didn't know I could fly like that either," Irene admitted. "Until I had to." Wilson laughed. "That's how it works in this squadron. You discover capabilities you didn't know you had because the missions demand it." He gestured to a chair. "Briefing starts in 10 minutes. Today we're covering advanced terrain masking and weapons delivery in contested airspace. Tomorrow you fly your qualification mission." "Qualification mission?" Irene asked. Saracen answered. "Every pilot joining the 354th has to complete a high-risk mission under evaluation. It's how we ensure everyone can handle the pressure. Don't worry though. After yesterday, your qual mission is just a formality." The briefing was intense, covering tactics that Irene had never been taught in her regular training. How to use terrain features to mask your approach from enemy radar. How to deliver weapons while performing evasive maneuvers. How to operate with degraded systems and battle damage. These pilots expected to get shot at, expected to take hits, and trained specifically for how to complete the mission anyway. Question, Irene said during a discussion of low-altitude tactics. If you're operating this low with this much terrain masking, how do you maintain situational awareness of friendly positions? The briefing officer, a major with graying hair and 3 rows of ribbons, smiled. Good question. That's where your European training actually gives you an advantage. NATO doctrine emphasizes precision and civilian protection more than our traditional doctrine. Those skills transfer directly to complex battle spaces where friendlies and enemies are intermixed. Most pilots weren't there, sir. I was. And those men needed someone willing to take calculated risks. The intelligence officer nodded thoughtfully. Your precision was remarkable. We're incorporating your tactics into our training protocols. After the debriefing, Irene finally made it back to her quarters. It was nearly midnight. She'd been awake for 20 hours, and her body felt like it had been through a combat deployment rather than a single mission. She peeled off her flight suit, noticing for the first time the bruises on her ribs from the G-forces and the raw spots on her hands from gripping the controls. Her phone had dozens of messages. Her sister in Prague had somehow heard about the mission and was simultaneously worried and proud. Fellow pilots from flight school had sent congratulations. Even her father, who'd been skeptical about her military career, had left a voicemail in Czech saying he'd always known she was capable of greatness. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Major Elena Volkov, a Russian-American pilot Irene had met during a NATO exercise 2 years ago. Elena had faced similar challenges, similar doubts about her capabilities. Heard what you did today. You just changed the game for all of us. Every female pilot who gets dismissed as too emotional, too weak, too whatever, now is proof that excellence transcends prejudice. Proud of you, sister. Irene read the message 3 times. She hadn't thought about it in those terms. She'd just been trying to save lives. But Elena was right. By succeeding so spectacularly in the face of doubt, she'd opened doors for others. Sleep came hard despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept replaying the mission, analyzing decisions, wondering if she'd done everything optimally. The sound of the missile proximity warning. The feel of the stick in her hands during that final approach with no fuel. The faces of the maintenance crew examining her bullet-riddled aircraft. When her alarm went off at 0500, she felt like she'd barely slept. But there was no time to recover. She had to report to the 354th Fighter Squadron in 1 hour, and she had no idea what to expect. The 354th's ready room was different from her old squadron. The walls were covered with mission patches and photographs of aircraft in combat. These weren't training missions or routine patrols. Every image showed real ordnance, real targets, real combat. This was where the serious work happened. A dozen pilots looked up as she entered. Most were men, but there were 2 other women present, both wearing flight suits with impressive collections of mission patches. The atmosphere was professional but intense. These were people who'd seen real combat and had the scars to prove it. "You must be Hill," said a woman approaching her with an extended hand. "I'm Captain Saracen, one of your new flight leads. Welcome to the 354th. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. We're both captains. Call me Sarah." Chen gestured around the room. "This is the team. We heard what you did yesterday. Impressive flying." A tall pilot with a badly scarred left arm approached. "Captain James Wilson. I was the one you were covering for when you were stuck doing CAP in Sector November. Sorry about that, by the way. If I'd known you could fly like that, I'd have requested you as my wingman months ago." "I didn't know I could fly like that either," Irene admitted. "Until I had to." Wilson laughed. "That's how it works in this squadron. You discover capabilities you didn't know you had because the missions demand it." He gestured to a chair. "Briefing starts in 10 minutes. Today we're covering advanced terrain masking and weapons delivery in contested airspace. Tomorrow you fly your qualification mission." "Qualification mission?" Irene asked. Saracen answered. "Every pilot joining the 354th has to complete a high-risk mission under evaluation. It's how we ensure everyone can handle the pressure. Don't worry though. After yesterday, your qual mission is just a formality." The briefing was intense, covering tactics that Irene had never been taught in her regular training. How to use terrain features to mask your approach from enemy radar. How to deliver weapons while performing evasive maneuvers. How to operate with degraded systems and battle damage. These pilots expected to get shot at, expected to take hits, and trained specifically for how to complete the mission anyway. "Question," Irene said during a discussion of low-altitude tactics. "If you're operating this low with this much terrain masking, how do you maintain situational awareness of friendly positions?" The briefing officer, a major with graying hair and 3 rows of ribbons, smiled. "Good question. That's where your European training actually gives you an advantage. NATO doctrine emphasizes precision and civilian protection more than our traditional doctrine. Those skills transfer directly to complex battle spaces where friendlies and enemies are intermixed." But the real test came 3 days later when Commander Reeves returned to base to brief his next operation. Irene sat in the mission planning session with the SEAL commander and her new squadron mates, listening to details of a high-risk insertion into hostile territory. "We need close air support on station throughout the operation," Reeves explained. "The enemy knows we're coming. They'll have prepared positions and likely some portable air defense. It's going to be hot from the moment we insert until the moment we extract." "How many personnel?" Sarah asked. 42 SEALs, plus 4 Air Force combat controllers. Everyone's going in because this target is critical. Intelligence indicates a high-value target meeting at this compound. Reeves pointed to satellite imagery. But the compound is in an urban area. Civilian population surrounds it. We need air support that can provide precision fire without collateral damage. Everyone in the room understood the subtext. This was exactly the kind of mission that required the judgment and precision Irene had demonstrated. Aggressive enough to protect the ground team, but discriminating enough to avoid civilian casualties. "I want Captain Hill as primary air support," Reeves stated flatly. "With a second A-10 as backup. No offense to the rest of you, but I've seen how she operates under pressure. That's what we need for this mission." Sarah looked at Irene. "You up for this? First real mission with the 354th is going to be a major operation." Irene thought about the past 2 years. The dismissals, the doubts, the endless patrol missions while others flew combat sorties. She thought about the 389 SEALs she'd saved and the lives that still depended on someone willing to fly into danger to protect them. "I'm up for it," she said simply. The mission planning consumed the next 48 hours. Irene studied every detail of the target area, memorized approach vectors, identified potential threats, and coordinated with the SEAL team leaders on communication protocols and emergency procedures. She wasn't just preparing to fly air support. She was preparing to be an integral part of a complex operation where success measured in lives saved and mission objectives achieved. Wilson would fly as her wingman, an experienced combat pilot who'd completed dozens of similar missions. During their pre-flight brief, he offered advice. "The hardest part isn't the flying or the shooting. It's the waiting. You'll be on station for hours potentially, circling while the SEALs do their work. You have to stay sharp because when they need you, they'll need you immediately. How do you stay focused during the waiting? I run through scenarios in my head. What if they get hit from the north? What if SAMs come online? What if civilians flood into the street? You prepare for every contingency so that when something happens, your response is automatic." The night before the mission, Irene couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, thinking about all the ways the operation could go wrong. What if she froze at a critical moment? What if her precision wasn't good enough and she hit civilians? What if she let down the team counting on her? Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "I know you can't tell me what you're doing, but I can tell from your last message that it's something important. You've got this, big sister. You've always been stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Love you." Irene smiled in the darkness. Her sister was right. She'd spent 2 years proving she belonged. Tomorrow, she'd prove it again. The pre-dawn air was cool as Irene walked toward her A-10. Ground crew had already prepped the aircraft, weapons loaded and systems checked. Her Warthog looked menacing in the dim light, its nose-mounted cannon and wing-mounted ordnance ready for whatever the mission demanded. Wilson was already in his cockpit when Irene climbed into hers. The startup sequence was familiar, comforting even. Switches flipped, systems powered up, engines whined to life. She ran through her checklist with methodical precision, double-checking everything. "Hawkeye flight, this is Overwatch Command. You're cleared for departure. Mongoose Actual is wheels up in 15 minutes. Proceed to holding pattern Alpha and await further instructions. Copy Overwatch. Hawkeye flight departing now." The flight to the operational area took 40 minutes. Irene used the time to review her attack plans one final time, visualizing each potential scenario. The sun was rising as they reached the holding pattern, painting the mountains below in shades of orange and gold. It would have been beautiful if it weren't such a dangerous place. "Hawkeye 2-6, this is Mongoose Actual. We're beginning our insertion now. Remain on standby." That night, Irene sat in her quarters writing another letter to her sister. Not a goodbye letter this time, but a reflection on how far she'd come. "I spent 2 years being told I wasn't good enough," she wrote. "That I was too emotional, too cautious, too different to succeed in combat aviation. Now I'm about to fly the most important mission of my career, leading a team that trusts me completely. I've learned that the qualities people dismissed as weaknesses, my caution, my empathy, my refusal to take unnecessary risks, were actually strengths. They just needed the right circumstances to matter." The mission launched at 0400 hours under a moonless sky. Irene's A-10 carried a full weapons load, Maverick missiles, cluster bombs, and 1,150 rounds for her cannon. Sarah flew beside her, their aircraft perfectly coordinated as they headed toward the target. The flight took 2 hours, much of it at low altitude to avoid enemy radar. They threaded through mountain valleys, using terrain masking to stay hidden. Irene's hands were steady on the controls despite the high stakes. She'd visualized this mission dozens of times, prepared for every contingency. Hawkeye Flight, this is Reaper Actual. We're beginning our approach. Enemy positions are active. We're going to need you the moment we hit the ground. Copy Reaper. Hawkeye is standing by. The assault began with coordinated strikes from multiple directions. The ground teams moved fast, but the enemy response was immediate and fierce. Machine gun fire erupted from defensive positions. RPGs streaked across the valley. The task force was taking casualties before they'd even reached the compound. Hawkeye, this is Reaper. We need immediate fire on the northern defensive positions. Coordinates transmitting now. Irene rolled into her attack run, the mountain walls flashing past her cockpit. Her targeting system locked onto the enemy positions, but something felt wrong. The coordinates put her attack vector dangerously close to a cluster of buildings that intelligence had marked as status unknown. She had 3 seconds to decide. Follow orders and risk civilian casualties, or delay to verify and risk American lives. Her training, her instincts, and her hard-won judgment all aligned. Reaper, stand by. I'm repositioning for a cleaner shot. 2-6, we're taking casualties. We need fire now. Understood, Reaper. 15 seconds. Irene adjusted her approach angle, coming in from a different direction that would give her a clear shot at the defensive positions without endangering the uncertain buildings. It was a harder shot, requiring more precision, but it was the right call. She fired. Her cannon rounds tore through the enemy positions with devastating accuracy. The defensive fire ceased immediately. Good hits, Hawkeye. That's what we needed. The operation continued for 3 more hours. Irene and Sarah provided constant overwatch, engaging threats as they emerged, protecting the ground teams through every phase of the assault. When enemy reinforcements appeared, Irene stopped them. When SAM sites activated, she destroyed them. When the extraction became complicated, she created the opening they needed. By the time the ground teams lifted off with their objectives secured, Irene had expended every weapon on her aircraft and most of her cannon ammunition. Her A-10 had taken hits again, but she'd kept it flying and kept her team safe. As she turned toward home, General Vance's voice came through on the command frequency. Hawkeye 2-6, this is Overwatch Actual. That was some of the finest combat flying I've witnessed in 30 years. Well done, Captain. Irene's voice was steady as she replied. Just doing my job, sir. But inside, she felt something profound. She'd proven beyond any doubt that she belonged in the most demanding missions combat aviation could offer. Not despite her qualities, but because of them. 6 months after the mountain compound operation, Captain Irene Hill stood at the front of a briefing room filled with new pilots arriving at Kandahar. She'd been asked to share her experiences, to help them understand what combat operations really demanded. She looked at the faces before her, seeing the same mixture of confidence and uncertainty she'd felt 2 years ago. Some were fresh from flight school. Others had been flying patrol missions, waiting for their chance at real combat operations. A few were women who probably faced the same doubts and dismissals she'd experienced. My first 2 years in this theater, I flew patrol missions, Irene began, her Czech accent still present but now worn with pride rather than self-consciousness. I wasn't assigned to combat operations because my commanders didn't trust me. They thought I was too emotional, too cautious, too likely to hesitate when decisions needed to be made quickly. She paused, letting that sink in. They were right to question me. But they were wrong about what that meant. Yes, I'm cautious. I think about consequences. I consider the bigger picture. Those qualities made me a better combat pilot, not a worse one. Irene pulled up footage from her first unauthorized rescue mission, showing her A-10 diving toward the valley where the SEALs were trapped. This was the mission that changed everything. I broke rules to fly this. I disobeyed direct orders. And I'd do it again, because 389 American soldiers went home to their families that night. She advanced through more footage, showing missions from the past 8 months. Urban operations where precision mattered more than firepower. Mountain insertions where terrain knowledge saved lives. Complex engagements where split-second decisions determined success or failure. Combat aviation isn't about being the most aggressive pilot. It's about being the most effective pilot. Sometimes that means unleashing overwhelming firepower. Sometimes it means holding fire when every instinct says to shoot. The trick is knowing the difference. A young female pilot in the back raised her hand. "Captain Hill, how did you deal with the doubt? With people saying you weren't good enough?" Irene smiled, recognizing herself in that question. "I prepared. While everyone else was relaxing after duty hours, I studied terrain maps. I ran simulations. I developed skills nobody asked me to develop. When my moment came, I was ready. You can't control what others think of you, but you can control how prepared you are." After the briefing, several pilots approached with questions. But one conversation stood out. A young captain with a thick Southern accent and obvious nervousness introduced himself. "Ma'am, I've been flying patrol missions for 18 months. I keep getting passed over for combat assignments. They say I overthink things, that I'm not aggressive enough." Irene recognized the pain in his voice. "What's your name, Captain?" "Robert Hayes, ma'am." "Captain Hayes, let me tell you something. The military needs aggressive pilots. But it also needs thoughtful pilots. Pilots who consider consequences and make smart decisions. Don't let anyone convince you that caution is weakness. It's wisdom. Keep preparing, keep learning, and when your moment comes, you'll be ready." Hayes nodded, his expression showing hope for the first time. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from you." As Irene walked back to her squadron area, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She was no longer the overlooked logistics of patrol pilot. She was a combat-proven aviator with a reputation for excellence. She'd been recommended for a medal, promoted to lead new pilots, and most importantly, she'd earned the respect of everyone who'd once doubted her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Commander Reeves. "Hill, got another operation coming up next month. Complicated, dangerous, critical. Want you on air support. You in?" Irene smiled and typed her response. "Always. Send me the brief." She looked up at the afternoon sky, watching A-10s taking off for their missions. Somewhere up there, pilots were protecting ground teams, making split-second decisions, proving their worth through skill and courage. She'd be joining them tomorrow, flying another mission that mattered. The journey from dismissed patrol pilot to elite combat aviator had been long and difficult. But it had taught Irene something invaluable. Your worth isn't determined by others' doubts. It's determined by your preparation, your character, and your willingness to do what's right even when it's hard. She'd spent 2 years being told she didn't belong in combat aviation. Then she'd spent 8 months proving that she belonged at the very top of it. Not because she was perfect, but because she was prepared. Not because she never felt fear, but because she acted despite it. Not because she ignored her empathy and caution, but because she used those qualities to make better decisions. As the sun set over Kandahar Airfield, Irene Hill headed toward her quarters to plan for tomorrow's mission. There would be more challenges, more doubts to overcome, more lives to protect. But she was ready for all of it. Because that's what happened when you stopped accepting others' limitations and started exceeding your own expectations. One impossible mission at a time. The Warthog that had carried her through so many battles sat on the flight line, its battle scars visible even from a distance. Tomorrow, she'd climb into that cockpit again and do what she did best, protect those who needed her, prove that excellence transcends prejudice, and show the world that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly the ones we need most. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.